in-flight simulating. What a recipe that could spell disaster. But in all seriousness, Ace Combat 4 and Ace Combat 5 are two of the best games I've ever played for the PS2, or at least a former is. The latter is still a fine game on its own, but is a little rough on the edges. But a constant point of conflict has always been which game is better. It has often been said that Ace Combat 5 is the best Ace Combat game. However, no matter how hard I try to think that way, I just can't. It just doesn't sit right with me. I always found Ace Combat 04 to be the superior game in my opinion. Finally, this age-old conflict must have a resolution. Here is I rest my case that Ace Combat 04 Shattered Skies is the superior Ace Combat game. Allow me to explain.
Number 1. The story.
Ace Combat 04 and Ace Combat 5 have completely different types of stories. Whereas Ace Combat 04 told a story that was distant from the pilot you played as, Ace Combat 5 told a story closer to the squadron you controlled. There are pros and cons to this. Ace Combat 04 felt like it was telling two different stories, and it would have been good if it chose to stick with one. On the other hand, Ace Combat 5's story felt like it was heavier with the power fantasy of being able to fly an unstoppable pilot, because the narrative was focused on the pilots and the war they fought. It depends on what you prefer. Ace Combat 04 had a grounded story that focused on a war going on at home. A different side, if you will, as well as giving the enemy you fought, Yellow 13, some humanity. The story is simple in its execution, but still very much one that tells a human story. Ace Combat 5 feels like it focuses more on a war made out of conspiracies, and how the heroes of the skies, the squadron, overcame the struggle. I actually really like the concept of Ace Combat 5. However, one step that it misses is characterization. This is where the hitting point for Ace Combat 04 comes into play. A few characters Ace Combat 04 presented, they still felt like they were developed and fleshed out. Yellow 13 goes from being a hero that never lost a wingman to a man humbled by the loss of his most important wingman, Yellow 4. It explores the aspect of war that your enemy can be human too. Ace Combat 5 suffers in this way because it tries too hard to create a life for each of the characters, but all of them end up being one note. Chopper is the comic relief, Grim is the newbie, and Nagase is the anti-war woman. Being part of this has a lot to do with the fact that Ace Combat 04 has still cutscenes, while Ace Combat 5 had full motion cutscenes with voice acting for each of the characters, so you get to know them a little better. But Ace Combat 04 succeeds in this department, if only by a little bit. You do sometimes get the feeling that the voice story intersects with Moby's ones. Ace Combat 5 is better at having stakes, but Ace Combat 04 had the better characters, which is what matters, even if they were few and far between.
Number 2. The missions.
Each of the games seems to have a much different approach in regards to how they design the missions. Ace Combat 04 seems to try and take a more free-roaming approach with how they are structured. They focus mainly on accumulating points. However, there are some that require you to destroy a super weapon like Stonehenge or escorting a fighter. Most of them are about going around in an arena and blowing targets up. On the other hand, Ace Combat 5 takes on a more structured approach to its missions. While there are some missions in Ace Combat 5 that have you engaging in an open area, most missions confine you into a small box. Take Handful of Hope, for instance. That mission has you carefully trying to navigate through circles of AA guns, and it's just in Ace Combat 5, everything feels so scripted, almost like a narrative. Even the linear structure of each of the missions may provide to some form of variety for the game. most of the time it feels like it handicaps you, like Reprisal, for instance.
Once you've reached the airspace over the city, drop the neutralizer bombs.
Ace Combat 04 succeeds in this manner because the missions are more open-ended, the levels feel bigger, and there's a lot of strategizing required to how you approach each of the missions. Sure, there were missions like Tango Line that really got on my tits. However, these were rather few and far between.
Number 3. The presentation.
Ace Combat 04 runs at a consistent 30 frames per second. Ace Combat 5 tries to do the same, however, I do get the sense that Ace Combat 5 frame rate does tend to dip a bit here and there. As for the radio chatter, well, listen for yourself.
Unbelievable! We gotta bag all these planes?
You think every enemy plane in the area is up and flying?
Well, let's ask them. Hey, how many planes you got there? Man, this is making me cry.
In Ace Combat 5, the radio chatter, while it has more character, tends to be really annoying and stereotypical because all the characters are just one-note stereotypes. It gets even more annoying when you die over and over again and you have to listen to the same lines repetitively. Also, Chopper just won't shut up.
Oh, how peaceful this place is. I'm choking up here.
Which squad?
While Ace Combat 04's radio chatter was not as prominent, it was not as in the way as Ace Combat 5's radio chatter, and despite its simplicity, it also generally moved the story forward.
Your call sign is Mobius 1. We'll refer to you by this name at all times. You are now under my command. 6 bombers on Vector 360 confirmed. Continue north to intercept. Today's my birthday. A victory sure would be nice.
If there's one thing that I can say that Ace Combat 04 does better than Ace Combat 5, it is that less is better. Despite the fact that there's a fewer variety of missions in Ace Combat 04, most of them were fun to play through because of their non-linearity. Despite the fact there were fewer characters, they tended to be better developed. Even though the radio chatter was not as prominent as Ace Combat 5, it was not as in-your-face as the sequel. Ace Combat 4 being a stripped-down game made it more enjoyable. It was simple in its own execution that made it a fun game, unlike Ace Combat 5. Even though Ace Combat 5 was very ambitious in its scope, it was ultimately that ambition that sometimes killed the enjoyment of it. Therefore, Ace Combat 04 is the better Ace Combat game compared to Ace Combat 5 Unsung War, in my opinion.